There's a chap just near George.
Yeah, question for Tom. I had to do that. Tom Baer, you talked about the user interface and how we're missing opportunities in presenting content in the right way. The more I think about this, it seems publishers should be creating the content, good metadata, good context, as you say, but why not allow third parties to create the platform? And you might have several vendors with different platforms. So I might want to look at the Oxford content through your platform or through Atipon or through someone else. So people can concentrate on what they're good at, rather than the publishers creating the content and having a huge team building a specific platform.
Yeah, I think the issue is that the publishers know the content really well, and it may well be that eventually there's a sort of a transition to where there's platforms that are, like I said, I do think that at that sort of discoverability level, if you're looking at sort of trying to contextualize content, it may be broader than a particular publisher. But let me tell you, you don't want to give these interface decisions over to engineers because they really don't understand the underlying content. You really need this, the publishers really understand how, the underlying structures of their content. Now, they may not always understand exactly how their users are using it, and so it's, I think, equally important to interrogate the users to make sure that the interfaces are really being used the way everyone thinks they are, and that they're really providing value to the users. And so there's sort of no reason that you shouldn't be doing that, and if you're and paying attention to the metrics that the platform gives off. So I guess I'm not entirely disagreeing with you that it may not be the publishers, but the publishers certainly have a huge role to play because they do understand their content and the sort of peculiarities of it better than anyone else.
I'd like to add to that actually a little bit. I mean, so my background's in library management systems, and it always seemed to me to be very odd that a transition didn't take place about 10 years ago, where the user experience for electronic content was managed by the library management system, and the library management system vendors or the market or something failed to make that work. But it always kind of seemed to me the right way to expose this content was that the content was in a machine-readable, deconstructed form, and then your institution bought a library management system that then exposed that content in a consistent way for your user base. And it sort of didn't happen, and I don't quite know why not. If somebody in the room knows why not, I'd be quite interested to hear that. Anthony at the front there.
Anthony Watkinson, this is a question mainly for the first Tom, but the second Tom will just probably have insights into this as well. Both of you will have insights. My question is really, we're talking about things being put on top of content. I mean, I'm saying this very crudely, but that's what I see it. And the content is content structured and written by people in a traditional way. And as far as I can tell, I mean, I know Emerald quite well from the past. I'm one of your authors. You seem to publish books and journals on the whole, or certainly journals in the past and books more recently. Authors to do things differently. If not, aren't you causing yourself problems in using the material in the way you would like to do?
That's right. We have a lot of content for libraries and for the research community, but increasingly it's not necessarily amending that through flow of content. It's what we add, how we add value, and what we then do to it. Because I've been frustrated that the scholarly publishing industry has a route to the librarian and an acceptability that the article is good enough for the vast majority of the stakeholders, i.e. the researchers. If the pressure and the dynamics are such that cash flow and outcomes and impact are being driven by those same customers, then it's right and proper that we can begin to, at our cost, develop content, layers on top, or increasingly containers, different sorts of containers into which that content can be accessed and data can then be thrown up in different ways. So it's about crafting proper publishing outputs from that through flow. Now we are asking some of the, I mean, again, we're a bit hamstrung by some of the submission systems and what they will permit to be submitted. I mean, video and teaching content doesn't necessarily come through the one that we use at the moment, so obviously we're looking at that. We know that faculty write for class and they write for their peer group, and they are being, you know, we've had the discussion about how responsive academics can be, but nonetheless there are pressures on them to be attentive to different demands. So we have to adjust our systems in order to encourage them to do that, because everything is plainly set out in order to funnel articles through that community, which doesn't allow us to reach those new needs. So yeah, our core business is like that. I don't come or represent for that core business at the moment. It's a small area of the business which is growing, and it includes acquisitions, etc. as well.
Yeah, and just to comment on that as well, that tutorial interface that I showed, that there's actually a back-end system that the subject matter experts use to write and compile those tutorials, and so that's a case where, you know, they're actually writing to the online interface.
Okay, thank you. Who's next? I've got 100 questions here I can ask, so you better come up with some, otherwise you'll just have to listen to mine. All right, I'm going to ask one of my questions. So one of the things I'm interested in is this kind of usability thing, and that's both at the super detailed level and at the high level of, you know, where should we be going in version 2 of 2016. As an aside, the accounting system that I use for my business, it has a lot of the screens have a button labeled archive, and it's the same button on all the different screens. And sometimes when you press archive, what it does is it archives all the transactions on the screen. And other times when you press archive, it shows you what's in the archive. And I've about 10 times archived something I didn't mean to archive, and it's quite infuriating. So there's kind of usability thing. But actually what I was going to ask was about listening to customers and users and not listening to customers and users. And I think Apple famously say they never listen to customers because customers just want you to make a little improvement on your thing, right? Whereas if you don't listen to customers, you can take leaps forward. In both of your work, I mean, how do you balance the listening to customers and users and ignoring customers and users?
Yeah, it's a tension. And as Rick said yesterday, we also live in a deeply weird system where the users are not buying the software, and so oftentimes we're sort of forced to build interfaces and features that the librarians require, but that is not necessarily borne out by the usage. So it's sort of a balancing act of, you know, looking at what is currently happening and where we think the gaps are, and trying to take a lead on that. Trying to actually get out to the end users to see what would, you know, be useful to them, and providing the features that the actual purchasers of the content want us to have in them.
From our side, we're just interested in outcomes, really. So we will talk to the vast the range of stakeholders in the institution. Obviously, we have Vicky Williams' business as well as our own business. So our ability to have different conversations on campus, but also with the stakeholders that they're trying to influence. We look at the outcomes and then build accordingly or readjust our strategy, you know, only at the product level, so that we can experiment and deliver an outcome that is genuinely wanted. Librarians tend to want to do, you know, get involved with activities that are genuinely wanted, but they're not they're busy. So it's effective. We can demonstrate that we can solve a need or make something faster or develop a content management system that just makes everything easier, particularly with learning content. Then they were quite interested to have that conversation. So teasing out needs, I agree. If you show someone, would you like this? They'll say yes or no. If you demonstrate that life would be so much easier if you did it this way, and whether there's it's clearly following the money is to some extent there. It's being open to the big wide world that many individuals represent a business potentially, and we've been spoiled by being able to go to the go-between where we can sell something at large amounts. Even APCs are a transactional en masse thing, which we can, because of the incentives, we can sort of rely on to some extent. It's the lack of incentives and that discovery piece around outcomes that really can be quite compelling. And you have a lot of noise. Your business generates a lot of noise in order to find the jewel that will be that great add-on, and that incremental business model is worth augmenting your main one with.
Thank you. I was at a library conference a few years ago where a librarian asked a panel of library systems vendors why library systems were so awful. And they all sort of hummed and hawed and said, well, we listen to users and we're trying to improve and blah, blah, blah. And finally, a prominent systems librarian stood up and said, the reason why library systems are so awful is because library systems vendors have implemented every single thing that librarians have ever asked them to implement. And I think that kind of explained both the user interface complexity, but also a failure to take the leaps forward that need to be taken forward if you give yourself some space to make those leaps forward. Okay, another question from the hall.